And finally, last but not least, please enjoy this presentation by Jason Foster from the San Diego County Water Authority to learn more about where water comes from in San Diego County and how it is allocated.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the invitation to join you. As Giovanni said, my name is Mike Lee. I'm with the San Diego County Water Authority's public outreach team. And I guess just on a personal note, it's a pleasure to be here because my wife's family settled up in this area in the 50s and had a small avocado grove going back many years. And so I have a deep appreciation for what it is you all do on the land and the benefits that you bring to our quality of life and our economy here in San Diego County. And I also suspect that it's true that that you face a lot of the challenges. Well, Danny just was talking about a lot of the challenges with the water supplies. I was talking with Giovanni earlier about large developments coming online in, I believe it was Chile, somewhere in South America. And I know that you guys are under a lot of pressure, facing a lot of change, and that's exactly where we find ourselves in the water industry today. We are in uncharted waters, a territory that nobody's been in before due to regulatory pressures, changes in consumer demands, changes in weather and climate. And so we are trying to lean into those changes at the County Water Authority. In fact, just this week, our general manager announced the creation of a new position that you probably would associate more with a Silicon Valley company than a water purveyor, and that is a Chief Innovation Officer. And the idea for this position is that what worked 10 years ago, what worked 5 years ago, 20 years ago, may not work tomorrow. We don't know what that new challenge is going to be as we saw just in April with the governor's mandates for across-the-board reductions for urban water use, and we'll unpack that a little bit. But I think it's important that you understand that we are in this unprecedented era of change and trying to embrace those and find new solutions, new ways to move ahead within all of these constraints. And so to do that, I want to start with a bit of an overview, and I apologize if this is parts of this may be a bit rudimentary to you, but I think it's important to kind of lay the groundwork for where we are here in San Diego County. And let's make sure I can operate this guy. Yeah, there we are. Okay, so the Water Authority is a wholesale water provider. We have the big pipes. The 72-inch, the 108-inch, I think, is about our max, somewhere in that range. These connect, actually, right in this area, connect to imported supply lines. Right there, you can see the light blue is coming down from Lake Skinner in the Metropolitan Water District, and then we connect right there, not too far from where we're standing, and then distribute the water through kind of the backbone of the county here to our 24 member agencies. All those different colored splotches on the map are the retail, we call them member agencies. They're your local water providers that buy water from us, and they also, in many cases, have their own local supplies or are in the process of developing those supplies. Particularly, there are some a bit of groundwater we'll look at, and then some recycled water as well. And it's worth noting that we are the largest member agency of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, which encompasses 6 counties of Southern California. So we buy an enormous volume of water from MET, as it's called, each year. Overall in our region, we've got 3.2 million people. We serve the vast majority of those, again, through our member agencies who we work very closely with. Our board comprises representatives from each of those member agencies. So they, set the vision for the Water Authority. So somebody asked earlier, where does our water come from in San Diego County? Well, we've got basically three main sources, and it's worth noting that the two major ones, we are at the end of the pipeline, literally and maybe figuratively as well. So this is a 5-year average. About 20% of our water comes through the State Water Project through the Metropolitan Water District. Right, it comes down the California Aqueduct, so that's part of, again, the state system, not the federal system that Danny was talking about. We're on get water through the state system. And then about 2/3 of our water comes from the Colorado River, from two main ways, I guess you would say. One is through Metropolitan, and they operate the Colorado River Aqueduct right there. And we also have a long-term water conservation and transfer agreement right here with the Imperial Irrigation District that provides an enormous amount of water, about 200,000 acre-feet this year of water that is conserved in that farming region and then transferred to the urban coast. And then finally, the last segment is local supplies. So we basically got a little bit of groundwater. We'll look at a map in just a minute. We've got a bit of runoff that we capture, essentially. There are 25 reservoirs that our member agencies and the Water Authority own and operate, mostly along the edge of the backcountry. And then there is some water recycling. That's a growing supply. And soon, very soon, hopefully, we will have seawater desalination coming online, and we'll again get to that as well. So we talked about groundwater being minimal in San Diego County. Up in LA and Orange counties, they have large groundwater basins represented by those colored areas there. They've got the huge drainages coming out of the San Gorgonio Mountains, San Jacinto Mountains, right? And it settles in, and they have large aquifers. Not so much in San Diego County. We've got some, particularly down in South County, the Sweetwater area. That's how it got its name, was they were able to tap sweet water, drinkable water, in the South Bay. But that is a very minor supply at this point in comparison to the demand. I don't think I have to tell you guys this, but we don't get a lot of rain here, right? In fact, 1946 was the last year that what you might call the native or natural water supplies in San Diego County met the demands of San Diego County. So in 1947, we were connected to the imported water system, and ever since then, we have been largely reliant on water from outside this region to serve the needs of what has become one of the largest metropolitan areas in the country, not to mention one of the most productive farming regions in the country, right? A few $billion in terms of farm gate value here. So Danny was talking about kind of the drought landscape, if you will, and he specifically mentioned 2010. There's that wet year in a lot of dry years. And that's where we find ourselves today after 4 dry years, indeed very dry years, and starting the 5th. Water managers, we tend to talk about things in terms of a water year, which we start on October 1, which is theoretically at least when water starts gathering, if you will, for meeting the demands of the next spring, summer, into the fall. So this goes back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier. In 1947, we connect, the Water Authority is formed in 44, and then 1947, we connect to Metropolitan. And over time, over the next decades, then we became heavily dependent on Metropolitan, so that this is what our kind of supply portfolio, if you will, look like in 1991. A little bit of local supplies, and then imported water from MWD. So we had a problem. You guys probably all remember 1987 to 1992. I wasn't here then, but I've heard the stories. These are the actual headlines clipped from the pages of the newspaper in those days. In fact, in 1991, we were at the point where MWD, remember, we were dependent almost entirely on Met for water, right? And Metropolitan rapidly escalated through its drought response levels in the matter of a couple months. So we went from 0% allocation up to a 31% allocation in early 1991. That's what we were going to be cut back. And then they were talking about a 50% allocation for the San Diego County. And again, I know most of you lived this, so I won't belabor it. But what happened at that point was civic leaders in San Diego region came to the Water Authority, quite literally. The offices now are in Kearny Mesa. They were downtown San Diego at that time. They lined up out the door, down the street, around the block, and for hours on end berated our board for putting all of our eggs in one basket, essentially, not having a diversified water supply portfolio. And they said, we need to do something different to support the San Diego County that we have and that we envision and that we want for our children. And so this really, we actually still have the poster that looks very much like this. This is modified, but the civic leaders in San Diego actually brought us a big poster of 3x4 or something, and brought it to the board in 1991. It still sits in our office today as a reminder of what our mission is. And this is the start, you might say, of the modern Water Authority story. So since that day, we've done a lot of things differently. And it really started with water conservation. And you can see there we are in 1990. This is kind of before the drought. It was during that drought, but before the rubber really hit the road. And you can see over time, we have dramatically reduced as a region through farm efficiency efforts, through municipal and industrial efficiency efforts, water use, so that today we sit at about 143 gallons per person per day. It's worth noting that the state set a target a couple years back. I want to say it was 2009, but I'm not 100% sure. They set this 2020 target of 167 gallons per person per day, and obviously we're well below that today. So this is a critical, fundamental, foundational part of what we have done in this region, but there's more to the story than that. And this is really a story. Up here in the corner is the pie that I showed you first. Here we are, bottom left, today. So no longer are we 95% dependent on Metropolitan? Actually, we are about half of our water today comes from Metropolitan. The next largest segment comes from those Colorado River Conservation and Transfer Agreements that were part of what is bureaucratically called the Quantification Settlement Agreement of 2003, had many components. Some of the components that were vital for the Water Authority's interest were these conservation and transfer pieces of the pie. Not incidentally, the QSA also helped California live within its allotment of water from the Colorado River, which is increasingly important as there are more and more interests vying for that water on the Colorado River Basin. So I won't go through each piece of this, of the pies here, but it's worth noting that those Colorado River transfers continue to expand, and they reached their peak actually in 2021, but in 2020 they look like that. So, and then this orange piece of the pie is also worth pointing out. This is the desalination project, and I have a couple slides on that, so I won't go into that now, but I want you to see that that's about 8, maybe 10% of our projected supply in 2020. And then if we fast forward ahead, to 2035, obviously there's a lot that could happen and will happen between now and then. But our projections are that this next big slice of the supply will come from water reuse, basically. The city of San Diego, Padre Dam Water District, and others are actively looking at ways to recycle water and use it for potable purposes. And you know, that is really what we see as the next big local source of supply. And it's also worth mentioning, because somebody brought it up in a question earlier, the Water Authority is fully supportive of those local member agency efforts to develop their supplies. In this case, we're talking about the potable reuse supplies. We see this as an opportunity for that all solutions are needed, not just one solution. We've really taken a diversified approach, as you can see here, and member agencies on the ground, especially those with the wastewater systems in place, are in a perfect spot to take advantage of that resource, and we have gone to bat for that in the state legislature and are fully supportive of those efforts. So here's really our mantra, reliability through diversification. We talked already about, you saw the water use and the conservation trend line over the past few decades, and the Water Authority really offers a whole suite of products, services, programs for conservation at the local level, at the household level, at the business level, even at the farm level, and we'll touch on some of those quickly here in a moment. But you can see, I mean, this number here, 100,000 acre feet of demand offset through conservation. So that's equivalent to something like 200,000 homes a year that the demand of which is being offset, or will be by 2020, through these different programs. And if you know, we can drill down, but I think we'll move on to talk a little bit about the other pieces of that pie. This is the Colorado River Transfer Program. You can see it ramps up to its peak in 2021, and then that line just keeps going and going and going out 45 to 75 years for the water transfer with IID, and then the canal lining transfer is even longer term. I believe that's a 110-year transfer. So this is going to be about a third of our supply by 2020, obviously a significant piece. The canal lining was a fascinating, albeit somewhat intuitive project that we undertook through the QSA. Out in the Imperial Valley, they have large unlined canals, and they were, you know, they're porous, essentially. You know, water would just seep down and drain into the ground, and then often flow down south of the border. And through some leadership by the Water Authority and joint effort with some other water agencies, we lined those, I want to say it was about 58 miles of canals between the Coachella and All-American canals, and then we were credited with the conserved water, the water that wasn't leaking into the ground. And that, of course, is, yep, there we go, 110-year transfer, 80,000 acre feet a year. So a very important conservation and transfer program. Groundwater, we talked about a little, so I won't go into more depth, except to say, you know, it is a small portion, 5% or so of our supplies. Local surface water, we talked a little bit in the previous session about dams and reservoirs. A lot of the prime sites for those have already been taken. They were the dams built in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and are still serving us today. This is the Water Authority's newest dam. This is Olivenhain Dam. So there's Escondido, right? And here's Lake Hodges. And so this was completed in 2003 as part of our emergency storage project to make sure that we had sufficient supplies in the region if say there was an earthquake, for example, that severed the imported supply lines. This is part of that emergency storage project, and it actually then can transfer water between Lake Hodges and Olivenhain. Combined storage of about 745,000 acre feet, and we'll talk in a moment about another major dam project that we recently completed. This was, it's worth noting, the first major dam in San Diego County when it was completed in 50 years, in 2003. Still a relatively small part of our supply. Recycled water, I would suspect that many of you have either considered or are actively participating in recycled water programs at your local water agency. I know FPUD and others have these programs, and they're looking to expand them through the Purple Pipe system. And we consider that a growing resource there, that it will expand over the next 5 years, and then obviously well into the future. This is perhaps our most exciting project at the moment, the Carlsbad Desalination project. If you drive I-5 much, you probably saw the cranes there off Cannon Road through most of 2014 and early 2015. Those cranes are down now because we are really at the final stage of kind of making sure the shakedown, if you will, for the plant. We expect that the developer of the plant, Poseidon Resources, will be going into the performance testing phase, which in the next few days, and that will be, we expect, a 30-day process, at the end of which we should be able to receive and the commercially produced water from the desalination plant. So hopefully by the end of the year, we will have that additional capacity in our system. It's worth noting a few things about this plant. It is the largest seawater desalination project in the country by far, and it will provide about 56,000 acre-feet a year. Up to that, the Water Authority has a contract with a private developer, Poseidon Resources, to buy between 48,000 and 56,000 acre-feet a year, depending on what our demands are at the time. And this will, it's a $1 billion project, and obviously that's a lot of money. The water that comes from the desalination plant will be more than twice the cost of water that we get from Metropolitan, but it comes with an important benefit, which is that it's locally controlled, it's drought proof, it's not going to be cut back, allocated by Metropolitan or that kind of thing. So we have, and it's south of the major fault lines, so it's besides being a core water supply, it's something that we can rely on in emergency situations. Our approach to this supply diversification for San Diego County is really consistent with what has been laid out in the state's Water Action Plan. Conservation is a way of life and becoming more so every day. Increasing regional self-reliance, that's this investment that we took on. Managing and preparing for dry periods, absolutely. And then expanding water storage capacity. And I think we're close here to being able to talk about we're going to talk about the San Vicente Dam here in just a second. So I mentioned water recycling or water reuse being an increasingly important piece of our water supply source into the future. And San Diego and Padre Dam are both working on those projects. 83 million gallons a day is projected to come from these sources for the region by 2035. Now, to put that in perspective, the desal plant is about 50 million gallons a day. So the impact of the recycling and reuse efforts in the region is, in total, more than the output of that plant. So that's potable reuse. We also are investigating, and it's important to couch this as such, we are studying the potential for another desalination plant at Camp Pendleton. And this is in partnership with, of course, base officials, Department of the Navy, U.S. Marine Corps, et cetera. We just entered a period of doing some initial tests on the intake system. That's one of the key regulatory points for desalination is how water gets into the plant and minimizing any environmental impacts at that point of intake. So we're in a process of a 2-year study out there right now. And the decision, there are many decision points along the way, of course, in a project like this, but we don't anticipate this being actualized until after 2035. So this isn't a near-term project, but one of our jobs is to kind of look into the future and say, well, what might we need 10 years from now? What might we need 30 years from now? And lay the groundwork for that today. Let's talk for a few minutes about investments in infrastructure. I already mentioned Olivenhain Dam, but this is our most recent dam project. And what we did here in cooperation with the City of San Diego, which owned, so the City of San Diego owns the dam that you can't see under there. They're right about here. There was the old San Vicente Dam. It still exists, and we were able to, using a technique called roller compacted concrete, essentially build a new dam that adhered to the old one and went up much higher, so that we created here an additional 152,000 acre-feet of storage in San Vicente Reservoir, which is down by Lakeside, if you're not familiar with that. Obviously this comes with a substantial price tag as well, $400 million, but this is one of those investments that the region has made to be forward-thinking, not only for times of where we might have the emergency, but also for years that are dry, and we can draw from that water source at those times. We'll come back to San Vicente because there's an important, very important note about what we're doing there today. There's Olivenhain, completed in 2003, 22,000 acre-feet of storage, right? So we've already discussed that a bit. We'll move on here. This is Twin Oaks Valley Water Treatment Plant. This is nestled in the hills north of San Marcos, and this is 100 million gallon a day treatment capacity, and really is designed to make sure that we don't have any limits, or that we're not limited by untreated water deliveries into the region. We can treat them for our member agencies as they need, and that was completed in 2008. We don't just build stuff, though. We also work very hard. In fact, we have a whole division based out of Escondido that does maintenance and operations. And one of the key things that we've been working on is taking these old pre-stressed concrete pipes and relining them so that we stay ahead of any repair issues that they may have. So you can see here, they call it a can. It's being, well, let me back up. So the pipeline obviously goes this way. We dig portals down to the pipeline, and then we use this machine to insert these canisters, and well, it's a little hard to see now. They're kind of wrapped. It's a very interesting process. They're wrapped a little bit tightly like this, so they're not at their full size when we put them in. And then they have welds where they're at the overlap, and then those welds are broken, and they pop out to fill up the concrete, the inside of the concrete pipe. And so that's been an important program that we do, and we continue to chip away at every single year. Here's our Lake Hodges projects, and let's see, sorry, we'll back up there. You can't see a lot of what's going on here. This is looks like a photo taken during construction, but this is a pump storage facility. Remember, Olivenhain Reservoir is about 700 feet higher, just out of sight there, and so there's a pipeline that goes from Olivenhain down into San Vicente, or down into Lake Hodges, and we can transfer water between the two facilities. We can generate, there's turbines in this below ground here. That building right there goes down 8 or 10 stories. There are turbines down there. We can generate peak power when SDG&E calls for it, and we can also take water out of Lake Hodges and then put it up into Olevenhagen and put it through our service area as well. So that's another important piece of the project. Overall, the capital improvement project, or program rather, is about $2.8 billion through 2030. Most of this has been completed. There are still some pieces that are under construction, but our building period for the foreseeable future is ramping down, and we're turning now more into working on making sure that everything is maintained and operated in the most efficient and cost-effective manner. Talk for a moment about our transitional special agricultural water rate program. I suspect most, if not all of you, know more about this than I do, so I won't go into great detail here. A few years back, I want to say it was maybe 4 or 5 years back, Metropolitan phased out its IAWP, its Interruptible Agricultural Water Program, and the Water Authority Board created the TSAR, as we call it. And the TSAR basically provides a cost savings to participants in exchange for lower level of reliability. And so when when the Water Authority gets a cutback from MET, then that's passed on in full to TSAR participants for an equal duration in exchange for the lower price that is paid for the water. There's also a storage component to this, so if we were to go into an emergency storage situation, TSAR participants or customers would be cut back at twice the level of the M&I customers. This program is it's not open to new enrollment, so if you're in it, you know about it. Again, we're not going to go into a lot of detail. I just wanted to mention that this was an important consideration for the board, and this program is scheduled. It was renewed earlier this year, and it's scheduled for a comprehensive review in 2020. So that's kind of where that is going forward. Now, the Water Authority also does have a water management program for agricultural water. The first element of that is, or one element of that is the irrigation system evaluations. We work closely with the Mission Resource Conservation District, which I think is based right here in the Fallbrook area, and they go out and they do about 60, I think it's about 60 a year site visits, and report back to the landowners about how they can improve their irrigation efficiency. If you haven't participated in that, it's free. I would invite you to check out Mission Resource Conservation District online, and we would that's a great resource for you. A couple other things that are kind of in the offing for 2016. We're using a DWR grant. We're looking at ways to provide financial incentives to convert to the purple pipe water. This is essentially going to be a pilot project in 2016. It'll be on a pretty small scale. I want to say probably just 1 or 2 sites, but the goal is then to expand this retrofit funding as grant money becomes available, and we are actively seeking that money. We have another new program for 2016, which is a research project that involves trying to make basically the most efficient use of water. This is again in concert or in partnership with the Mission Resource Conservation District, and there's going to be, we're hoping for dozens of participants in this program in 2016, and that will be something that I'm sure MRCD will get the word out about that. If you're interested in this, come see me afterward. I have some cards from our ag program manager who can fill in the details and kind of let you know what the timeline is, and I would encourage you to check that out and see if that's a good fit for your land. So let's talk a little bit about the drought. I know Danny already did that at the state level, but there's a lot going on here that I think is important to bring to bear. April 1, here's the governor in the Sierra. There should have been snow in the background. There wasn't. He issued an executive order that basically said he needed 25% savings statewide. And then the State Water Resources Control Board in Sacramento was really put in charge of implementing that order and figuring out what that means and how we get there. And so the board has set in place the water use reduction targets for every urban water agency in the state. And if you follow the news at all, you probably see, every month or so, well, literally every month, the agencies report to the state, and the state reports out, and it generates news stories about who's up, who's down, who's meeting the target, who's not. That's the genesis of the reports that you're seeing. So for the Water Authority, this created a really interesting dynamic, because through our diversification, we have local supplies, the Colorado River transfers that we talked about, the CDP is the Carlsbad project, and then our MWD water, even though it's been cut back about 15% this year, we have enough water on hand for fiscal year 2016, which we're currently in, to meet 99% of the normal year demands. So that diversification strategy that we've enacted over the decades had a very tangible benefit. Even after 4 years of drought, we could meet virtually all of the expected demands. However, the state board set these targets in place, mandated water use reductions by member agency. So the Water Authority doesn't have a target set by the state because we're a wholesaler, but the retail agencies have these in place. The net, let's see, yep, there's kind of the cumulative effect is plus or minus 20% reduction for the region, okay? We've hit the target. We've actually, as a region, exceeded the target every single month, 27%, and it's important to note that the base year here is 2013. So every month since the regulations were enacted, starting June 1st, the region has done far better than the regulations called for, even. I haven't heard anything about the October numbers, but we should be getting those very shortly wrapped up. And part of the reason that we're seeing those numbers is because the Water Authority has a very aggressive conservation outreach program that involves all kinds of partnerships around the region, advertising, online, TV, radio. Hopefully you've seen some of those. And the idea is really that we can do a little more. We can save water, and it's important to do so every day, every way. In fact, take a commercial break here. One of the things that we do is we offer through ourselves and in cooperation with MWD, we do offer numerous incentive programs. This sheet is on the back. This is the commercial, industrial, and institutional incentives, and there are some that are relevant for farmers. If you're interested on the municipal side, we have that as well. So because we, under state orders, can't use all the water that we have, what's happening to it? Well, we're putting it here at San Vicente Dam. Over the past, say, 6 months or so, since May, we've put more than 40,000 acre feet behind San Vicente Dam. Again, translated, that's enough water to serve about 84,000 families of four for a year. So we're storing water there. We're anticipating, so we got, as was noted earlier on the federal project, it takes a long time for dams to finish curing, right? This isn't the size of Shasta, but we're just now we just got verbal approval from the state to incrementally add more water and then more water, and we're anticipating that final formal certification any time, so we'll have the rest of that reservoir to be able to use for conserved water over the winter, and of course runoff that can be captured there as well if El Nino transpires how we hope it will. So speaking of El Nino, here we go. Here's the initial water year outlook for 2016, and I know it's a little hard to see, but the brown says drought persists, so don't expect it to go away anytime soon. We're in such a deficit situation that even a great El Nino will probably not, 1 year of significant rainfall will probably not kind of undo 4 drought years that we've experienced. Danny showed you Lake Oroville. Here's another way to look at it. Current level is nearing the record low level. Thankfully, we're not at that. There's about 1 million acre-feet of storage, but that's just, what, 1/3, 1/4 of the capacity of that reservoir right now. So what's ahead? And obviously, this changes day to day, week to week, but this is the El Nino forming out here, sea surface temperatures in the eastern Pacific. This looks a lot like, I want to say it was 1998 was the last really big El Nino year. I think there's a slide that will help us with that date. But what the forecasters are telling us is that there's a 95% chance that this El Nino will continue through the winter and then weaken into the spring. It was 1998, the red line. So here's this year. Sorry, this is a couple months out of date, but you can see that we're tracking with this big El Nino event in 1998. You might remember last year started out with, 2014 started with a lot of talk about El Nino, and then it kind of fizzled, right? And I guess that's a good note of caution that no matter how impressive this might look today, we don't know exactly what that's going to mean, and we don't know exactly where the water is going to be delivered. An El Nino event that only gets us wet here in Southern California will not kind of solve the problem, because this, as we already discussed, only 17 to 20% of our water supplies come from the San Diego region. So in 1998, again, that last big El Nino, about 19% of the water used to meet local demands was from local surface runoff. So again, even if we have a giant El Nino, it's not going to mitigate everything. And we still need a lot of snow in the Sierra, a lot of rain up north to fill Oroville and the other main reservoirs in Northern California. Okay, as we kind of try to land the plane here, I just want to give you this look at what NOAA's saying about precipitation. You can see probably the place to focus here is December through February, above average precipitation for Southern California, and strangely that line falls kind of right at the southern tip of the Sierra, right? I mean, so this is unclear what will happen in the Sierra, and furthermore, the Rockies look to be below average for the coming 3 months, right? And so 2/3 of our water comes through Colorado River, which obviously is fed by the Rocky Mountains, and then we have the State Water Project being fed by that area. So it looks good. I mean, it's better than it could be, but there's no guarantees at this point. Temperature obviously has played an important role here. I want to say 23 of the last 24 months, something like that, have been hotter than average. In fact, much hotter than average in San Diego County in recent months. And that is really expected to continue. We're likely to have above average temperatures all the way through the winter. Okay, so this is one of my favorite slides here. And trust me, thank you for your patience. We are near the end. I think I maybe just have one more. So in 1990, if we kind of rewind to then, we were using, as a region, potable water 641,000 acre feet. Today, we're down at 507,000, so a significant decrease. At the same time, our population has increased by about 800,000. The way that those two numbers match up, of course, is that the per capita use has gone down dramatically. You saw the stair stepping down that I showed earlier. We've also seen a significant bump in jobs over that period, and domestic product, the GDP for the region shows that we're doing significantly more with less water. Here's the downside, I suppose. There's the price of water, the cost of water. It's gone up dramatically as the region has invested. Again, all the cheap stuff is gone. It was developed 50 years ago, and it was subsidized in large part by state and federal governments. New water supply sources are much more expensive, whether you're talking about desalination, whether you're talking about recycling and reuse. They are more expensive, but they also provide a higher amount of reliability. And even with those price increases, it's worth noting that water still costs less than a penny a gallon on average in San Diego County. And even though we often hear otherwise, 2/3 of San Diego ratepayers believe it's a good or excellent value compared with the other utilities that they pay. When the Water Authority made the agreement with IID to conserve and transfer the water, as we talked about, from the IID service area, we used and still use Metropolitan's Colorado River Aqueduct to get that water physically to us. Our contention, which has been litigated now, was that Met was basically loading unrelated charges onto the cost of moving that water to us. And so we went to court over that, Superior Court in San Francisco, with a lawsuit in 2010 and then 2012 and then 2014. So there are actually three lawsuits over Met's rates and the contention that they don't comply with the cost of service requirements in state law, that what a government entity sells must be based on its cost. And so earlier this year, we won the second phase in that law. We won the first phase last year, in which the judge said that Met did not set its rates in compliance with cost of service and state principles and mandates in state law. And then earlier this year, Judge Carnell in San Francisco awarded the Water Authority a $188.3 million judgment. And then just earlier in October, I guess it was early October, we were given an additional award of $43 to $45 million in interest on the overcharged rates during the period that was being litigated, which was 11 through 14, 11, 12, 13, 14, right? Just a footnote, the 2014 case is essentially being held in abeyance until the 2010 and 2012 cases are settled or come to an end. So in any case, the number is upward. The number for what Metropolitan owes the Water Authority per the judgments is up over $230 million at this point. To answer specifically your question, I have not seen and I'm not aware of a calculation that would put that on a per acre foot basis. What I can say is that the Water Authority's board is planning to, or has already set the direction that the agency will deduct its legal expenses, which, by the way, we're seeking recompense for in court because we won the case, but whatever legal expenses we have we'll deduct, and then that money will be returned to the member agencies, the FPUDs and Rainbows of the world, in proportion to their overpayments. So that is likely the final judgment in that case, which is essentially the document that kind of wraps everything up, 2 phases, 2 discrete lawsuits. Final judgment wraps everything up into one complete item. That is expected in the next few weeks, basically, certainly by the end of the year. And then the bad news here is that it will probably be appealed and be hung up in the appellate system for a couple years. So. Well, we're very hopeful that ultimately we will continue to prevail in that case, but we are probably still some years from getting the money that the judge said we were owed. I'd maybe take 1 or 2 more if there's, yeah, please.
I just have a question. When I was a little kid, I went with my family and we vacationed at Lake Inshaw. I was wondering, how does Lake Inshaw feed into the San Diego County water system?
Okay, so you're testing my knowledge here just a little bit because that's not a water authority facility. No, but there are I believe it is operated and owned by Vista Irrigation District, and somebody here may be able to correct me if that's not right, but it's one of the local member agencies, and I believe it's Vista. They draw water from that. Yep.
2 questions. That 1365 acre foot cost,
Yeah.
that's wholesale to the locals, or is that to customers?
Let's check here and see if there's anything in my notes that say specifically on that. So that's full treated water. I believe that is the wholesale water rate.
Started the toilet to tap quote project. Is there ever in the conceivable future going to be economically feasible to go forward with that and try to take some of what we've dumped secondary to get it tertiary treated and make it potable water or at least usable?
Yeah, I don't. Bear with me here because I think this is an important point, and I made it right at the beginning, so I'm going to bring this back up because there's obviously a lot of interest in the potable reuse. Sorry about this, folks, but I'm going to. Yeah, so we're getting close. Okay, so this purple slice is what you're talking about. This is the potable reuse projection. So to answer your question directly, yes, that is likely an economically feasible and usable water supply source. In fact, we think that it's the next big chunk of water for the region is going to be potable reuse. And so the city's project, which is called Pure Water San Diego, is they are working in a dedicated fashion on that. And then just recently, the Padre Dam District in Santee started a demonstration facility along the same lines in hopes that they're going to be able to do that as well. So it is more expensive than imported water, but because it's energy intensive to go through the reverse osmosis and all the various types of treatment trains that you need to. But again, it's a supply that we have on hand. And I think, the public opinion polling that the Water Authority did, say, a decade ago, showed roughly a quarter of the population supported that. You look at our most recent public opinion polling that answered that question, which I want to say was 2013, and the number was in the 75% range. So public opinion has shifted dramatically. Not everything has been aligned in the regulatory sense and in the financial sense to make it happen. We do think we're going to get there. We have to get there.